Okay, so this is Mark's slide, and he's not here. Ooh, it's
I'll take
showing
it. I'll
notes.
barge right in. That
Go ahead, do that.
yeah. So
Today on Ask and Praxis, we have an empty chair where Mark was supposed to be. So let's just get started then, because that's how we feel about it. All right, so today's topic is News Year's resolution. Thank you, Emily, for the beautiful pun. SharePoint news to improve your communication. You know the team. If you've been here before, we all come at these topics from different perspectives, but here we all are, and we'll get started with the agenda. So we are going to start with the democratization of communications and what that kind of means as far as what we're talking about with news. Where and what is news? We will, of course, as we almost always do, bring the maturity model into the conversation, talking about the communication competency, and then we will do some business use cases to sort of tie it all together for everyone. As always, please feel free to come off mute and interrupt, ask questions, make comments. You can also do so in the chat. However you might like to interact with us is fine with us. You could also be polite and use the hand raise feature. Todd never does that, but you guys could be polite and do that.
Barge right in.
Exactly, barge right in. Okay, so this is Mark's slide, and he's not here. Ooh,
I'll take it.
Notes.
I'll barge right in.
Go ahead, do that.
Yeah. So one of the great things about communications, we wanted to talk about news and communications, and one of the things we wanted to make sure everybody understood was the value of it. And for me and for Mark, and that's kind of why I got this with him gone, is one of the things that I love about SharePoint is the way that it democratizes things. So that first worked its way into my heart a long time ago when I was a budding SharePoint administrator, wet behind the ears, bright-eyed. And I loved how, as an IT guy, I could be lazy. And once I created that site for a group, a business unit, they could do it. They could handle permissions. They could do all the things. I was able to democratize my job, which meant I could spend more time watching funny cat videos on the internet, emailing my mom, that kind of stuff. And
excellent use of your time, Todd.
Yeah. Exactly. That's why I don't work there anymore. I don't understand. But what it made for the end user is their environment better suited them because they knew how they used it and they could set it up well. So now, fast forward 2 decades, news and communications is like that now. So of course we're going to have our corporate communications folks with all their very stodgily worded things and all the wordsmithing, but we can also have individual groups and business units doing their own communication and news as well. And it's going to be more tailored to them and in their voice and all of that. So being able to democratize news and other things is really great. A great feature of SharePoint. I really love it.
Well done, Todd. You now get to take over for Mark all the time. All right. Well, let's move forward a little bit. Em, I think you're going to tell us about what and where is news.
Absolutely. So news has been around for quite a while, so many of you may already be aware, but essentially it is a SharePoint page with some added metadata, which is promoted state. Promoted state 2 means it's a piece of news, so it will go into the news web part. Promoted state 1 is just an unpublished news draft. Now that's specific to the SharePoint pages. Of course, we can also add in the news links as well for any external URLs. Now, all of this news that we are adding appears in a couple of different places. The first one we primarily think about is the news web part, which we can configure to show different sites and also filter content. Then, of course, it'll also show on your SharePoint start page, in the SharePoint app bar based off of where you have permissions, in the Viva Connections feed, and then also the SharePoint mobile app if you're using it. And what's pretty cool about that is there's actually push notifications. So it's one of the few places where you'll actually get push notifications for news. Now, you can also send news elsewhere to get more engagement. So maybe we have some news around a company holiday party. Maybe we want to send that to Yammer for people to start talking about what they're excited about. You can also connect any of your news in Teams via connector. So maybe your organization is in a team site. And they're always in Microsoft Teams first. They're not really going to that SharePoint site separately. You can add that connector so all of those news stories actually appear in the posts so they can see what's going on without having to go to that site. Oh, I put Yammer on there twice. I'm just very excited about it. You can also
it's the year of Yammer.
So
Yeah.
nice, they named
Apparently.
it twice.
Who's
Yeah.
not excited about Yammer, though? Who among us?
I mean, I felt like it needed more space.
Aren't we like 10 years into the year of Yammer?
Yeah.
Yeah, at least.
I guess this is also the problem if you edit your own slides. So the last one is you can also take these news posts and news links, which again are surfacing primarily in SharePoint, but you can actually send them over to email. It'll show that image, your news article title, some teaser text, the author, the date. Someone can click on it and it'll always go to the most updated version of that news story. Usually that's my #1 sell of why we should be making our news in SharePoint, because inevitably what happens, we make it an email, we send it out, someone asks a wonderful clarifying question, and then we have this amazing thread to the whole company with follow-up answers, when instead we could just be adding that context right in a page, not disrupting other people. And then anytime you look, you're going to have that most up-to-date information.
Cool. All right. So I think we're going to move on and drive into the maturity model. And since Mark is back from getting his meter checked, he's going to take this one, aren't you?
Yeah, my gas meter's fine, in case anyone is asking. We
We
have to have
all
it replaced, though.
If I wanted a standing desk, I would be on the edge of my seat wondering about your gas meter. So,
boom. The guy said no boom. So you know, as is our want, we'll often talk about things in the context of the maturity model. So a lot of organizations don't really have, you know, they're sort of not prepared to think about what news is when they first start using modern SharePoint, and that's fine. There are different sort of levels that you can go through in using news to as your organization matures, as you think through what kinds of things you actually want to accomplish. A lot of organizations that we work with, or at least when we start working with them, they're sending out a lot of essentially news as emails. And those emails go out to various groups and are no real patterns to them. People either get them or they don't. If somebody new starts with the company, they have no idea that that stuff has happened because they didn't get the email. So level 200, you know, we start to see some sharing of information using templates. You know, maybe some nice newsletters go out, but there's still an email. At least you've got some sort of cadence that's understood. There might be a little bit of a publishing plan there, but it's still more email based. Around level 300, we see communications shifting to news posts. And so rather than creating an email and later posting it as a news post or not, it's the other way around. We create news posts and then decide whether or not they have to go out in email. Around level 400, we actually see some monitoring and some attempts to understand the effectiveness and the readability of what's going out. There's a better communication plan in place. So for example, every department doesn't just send out a whole bunch of information every Friday at 10 a.m. because that means nobody sees anything because there's too much. So, you know, just some organization and some monitoring and metrics start to come into play. And then at level 500, which many organizations will never get to, but you know, you actually see some news posts that are generated automatically somehow using technology to watch traffic within the organization, sort of sense what different communities of people are interested in, and fires off information about what's been going on without necessarily human intervention. So you can see, you know, there are entry points here for your organization, regardless at which level you think of your maturity as being today.
Krista has a question. Krista, go ahead.
You. I'm not sure if you're going to cover this or not. In level 400, it states where the news posts and digests are monitored for effectiveness and readability. Are there additional tools that you use for monitoring that? Maybe the clicks or something like that? Is that, I haven't used News Digest, is that part of the tracking method, or what are some ways that can be done?
Well, since news posts are just pages, you know, you have the basic analytics that, and they're not that basic anymore that SharePoint gives you. So you certainly can monitor using those, you know, page analytics. They show sort of the how often and how much traffic that page is getting. You'd be surprised how many organizations publish things like news and never look at any of those numbers. So even just starting to look at those simple metrics is a big step forward. There are definitely third-party tools that you can bring into play that help you monitor things. You could develop solutions that actually reach into the site pages, libraries across your tenant and gather even more information. I've seen also Power BI dashboards with, sort of collecting those metrics from the audit log, for example. tyGraph is one of those third-party tools that helps you, take that audit log information and make a lot more sense out of it than you would necessarily get just looking at it directly.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark.
Cool. So I think for the next slides, we're going to take some use cases, do some use cases, and we're going to sort of tie them to these maturity model levels, right? So that's the goal for the next bit of slides. Certainly, again, if you have questions or comments or whatever and want to pipe up, please feel free to do so. So this first one, Mark, I think you're going to do highlighting specific news.
Yep. So, I mean, at the simplest level, people have a news web part on their homepage, on their intranet, or sort of at whatever the sort of highest level hub site is. And all the news just bubbles up from within that hub. You can actually very easily, so this is sort of, maybe it doesn't map exactly to the levels I just showed, which were sort of illustrative of how you can move up the maturity model. But even just thinking about, you may have several sort of subdomains of news, if you will. And here I'm showing company news versus department news. So in some organizations, the governance discussions lead us to putting more than one news web part on a page, and we're just filtering differently in each of them, so that we're giving people a way to sort of say, this stuff has this sort of level of importance, and this stuff has a different level of importance or frequency. So don't feel that you're limited just by having that default one company news one news web part on a page. Think about whether, and not always, this is not something you should just do because I've shown you a slide of it, but whether the way your organization thinks about the news that's sort of percolating in the different sites should be split out for different levels of interest. You can also, you can imagine that you could go way too far with this. You just certainly wouldn't want 6 of these news web parts on a page unless you were really thinking it through carefully. So, going from 1 to 2, maybe possibly 3, I think it would potentially be of interest if you have a use case for it.
Cool. So another one is surfacing a subset of news on the homepage. You're going to talk us through this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is pretty common when we talk about the democratization of communications. Sometimes there is a subset of news where we feel fine empowering all of our different content owners and site owners to post their own news. And then there might be some news that they're building in collaboration with that communications team. And anything that's built in collaboration with the communications team is really what we want to appear on the homepage. Now, you might ask, well, why doesn't communications just post all that news? If we post all of that news to the communications site, we're taking it out of context of the relevance of these different groups and where it's happening in the other related content. So for example, if IT is announcing that they're launching a new system, all the other training information about that system is going to be on their site. So if comms posts about it, we're talking about it in a different area than where we actually need to follow up on that announcement for whatever tasks we need to complete. So decentralizing makes sure that we're putting them in the appropriate context. So what we can do is we can actually just add a site column across all these different site collections. And what I've seen people do is pick something like news category And maybe the one that you want to filter up to the homepage is called company news. So anytime news is published from a department that's really critical and absolutely needs everybody's eyes, we tag it as company news, then it rolls up to that homepage web part. Now for the other news, which might be more nice to have information, we're not rolling up to the homepage because we're being really thoughtful about people's cognitive load. But if they want to learn more about that department, they just go to that site and they can see all of the things going on in that department there.
Cool. So another one, DCP, you're going to help us out with this, reaching the right audience. So audience targeting, right?
Yeah. So this is really about personalization and bringing content that is specifically relevant to the user right in line and in the page. We had a client that specifically wanted to promote news from their, from my department. So if I'm in IT, I want a news web part to see just the IT content there. And there's really two ways for us to go about doing that. One is to leverage audience targeting. And that would be to go into each individual news page, mark it with whichever group or category you intend for it to see. Then it just won't see, and you can use the out-of-the-box news web part. That is a great solution if that's where you're, but it is sort of manual, right? You have to go into each item. You have to make sure that that's a business process that you follow. And then you have to, on your page, create a web part that shows just that news. However, there's another way to do that. This would be also based off user profile data, and you can do that using the P&P search web part. If everybody knows we are huge fans of the P&P search web part, almost as good of fans of that as we are of the maturity model. More, yeah. It's sort of our Swiss Army knife, right, for everything. But one of the things that it does is it allows you to pull data specific to anything in the user's user profile. So you can create a very specific query that says where the department of news, news department is equal to my department coming out of my user profile, which is great. It is higher on the maturity level model because it requires two things. Number one, it requires really clean user profile data, which most organizations aren't super clean with that. And the other thing is, if it's not one of the few out-of-the-box profile pieces that get synchronized between AAD and the user profile service, then unfortunately you need to build some kind of custom synchronization to make sure that that data goes across and gets into
not a
UPS.
heavy lift, but you definitely got to build it by hand, which is tricky. Not for everyone.
Exactly, not for everyone, but it is definitely something that you can do. And then once you've got that data in the user profile, you can use the P&P search to do just about anything on that user profile data.
Cool. Consistent news templates, Emily.
So one thing that
cool. I didn't know half of this.
One thing that we think about a lot, right, when we're trying to create a consistent user experience is our page layouts. And this idea that if we format information the same every single time, people don't need to relearn how to interpret that information. So a really common example is we recommend writing in an inverted pyramid, where in the top section, you have an overview. And then maybe in a 1/3 right section, you want to have a summary that links to the headers throughout your article that covers the progressive disclosure of what you're talking about. What's nice about that is in your overview, really clear to someone what they need to do. And then in the top right, that summary serves as a mini IA of the content on the page. So again, people can scan really quickly. Now we've decided we want to implement this everywhere at our organization. Well, we have to look at our options. Of course, there's manual. You can build that page template in every single site. We're at a huge company. We have hundreds of sites. That sounds terrible. So let's look at some of our other options. You'll see I have the 2 green boxes on pages specifically, and then across site collections. So as you can see, page templates live in one site collection. So that's not necessarily going to help us. We can use some third-party migration tools like ShareGate or third-party template tools, big fans of Orchestry, and maybe that's a way to bring your pages across all your site collections. Unfortunately, we cannot use site templates as of right now, because they're not supporting those pages, but you could potentially use something like PNP provisioning templates. So essentially put those news templates in all of your sites ahead of time before you launch. So that way, when your content authors are publishing news, you're giving them a really clear guideline for them to follow. And sometimes it's nice to actually put in that template, this is where you put your overview, and explain to them how to actually fill out the page, and then they don't have to go elsewhere. There's usually a lot more adoption of your news governance if you do that.
All right, so another use case, and this one's more on my level, is doing customized news feed experiences. So all the rest of the Simpraxians have gone through sort of the ways that you can customize the things that you have out of the box, and almost all of them are around the idea that someone else makes the decision about what's important to the user, and it doesn't really give a way for the user to have sort of a lot of control over their own newsfeed experience, with the exception, of course, of when you do follow sites and they have news, that ends up affecting what news you see in some of the news feeds, like the SharePoint home news feed, and then I would assume Viva Connections news feed as well. So that is something that a user can do, but if you wanted to go even farther, you could build custom news feed experiences, web parts, et cetera, that provide more of a filtered experience. Let's say you had some custom metadata on all of your news pages, and you wanted to allow the users to pick which news items categories are important to them and which ones they wanted to see. So you could provide a user interface for the user to sort of set those things. You'd save their own personal configuration, you'd cache it, and then every time they come to that page with that web part, they'd see only the news for the categories they're interested in. Other things that you can do is provide entirely new news visualizations. Maybe your news user experience needs to be different from what you have available. Maybe you want to do some highlighting. Maybe you want to do some grouping, some different sorting and filtering options that aren't available through the out-of-the-box web parts. You can build those kinds of extensibilities. And then, of course, you could provide a search news functionality, which is not something that's super easily done. You could, tailor it really deeply into what your news information architecture looks like if you have custom metadata around your news, and provide some really interesting search functionality around your organization's news. So that's another way that you can do it. Does anybody else, and I'm putting people on the spot, but does anybody else have news use cases that they do in their organization or are interested in separately? Anybody want to bravely come off mute?
Ooh, I love that what Mike just brought up in the chat around content types, because I will say this is one of the areas where I'm really disappointed in the choice that Microsoft made. I really wish that they would have made news be a content type instead of that metadata on site page, because we do run into problems to that point of when we want to add, like the column I was talking about, technically I'm adding it to site page. So even when it's not a news story, that column's there. So it can be pretty limiting to have that structure.
100%. Yeah, that's not a great.
Yeah, I've used content types in the Pages library for something like a knowledge-based site, where you definitely want to have different kinds of pages, and you want to treat them as if they were, different content types, right? But when you're thinking about news across an entire tenant, content types get a little scarier. Emily and I have gone back and forth on this a couple of times. I think he talked to Sue Hanley about it too, and she disagrees that you should ever do it. I hope I'm not misquoting her. For pages, I've found that in those isolated instances, content types can be really powerful. Though, I mean, obviously we all love content types, so we know that they're powerful. It's just that you're sort of, because news is in with pages, and pages are sort of weird, and you can't create a second pages library. Wouldn't that be nice? That would solve a lot of problems.
Mark, I worry about using content types even in that isolated situation you're talking about, simply because that is a system-wide content type. And then you never know what Microsoft is going to do to change that in the future. And by changing the content type even in that one site, you might be breaking inheritance down the road.
Right. Well, obviously, you're always going to inherit from an existing content type. So you inherit from page. You certainly wouldn't ever mess with one of the out-of-the-box content types.
Oh, Carol, you got an awesome last name.
Microsoft can always do something to us. It's not like that's never happened before.
I think will is the operative word there, not can.
Yeah, and oftentimes we used to always joke that V3 is when Microsoft gets things right, and unfortunately, while they're going from 1 to 2, they change things, and
yes,
that's where we often get into trouble.
But if they change this and make news into content, I'll be psyched about it. Yes. Yeah, so I'm all here for it.
Yeah, as long as they give us some migration, let's pluck those news stories out and put them into this new magical news library. That would be perfect.
Cool. So those are the use cases. So we've got a bunch of resources here, a lot of resources. Wow, good linking. And luckily, because I'm presenting from Teams, you can click on the links. How nice is that? So we've got some stuff from Microsoft, the app bar, audience targeting, organizational news, and page templates. Emily has given you a lot from the Nielsen-Norman group too, about reading comprehension, about the inverted pyramid, text scanning patterns, information foraging, which is an interesting idea. I like mushroom foraging personally, but information is fine. Better link labels, that's one she's been training me on. I'm failing. I got an F on link labels. Community contributions. So we've got the evolution of company-wide email communications and SharePoint news, and sharing org-wide communications in Microsoft 365. So those are some links. You can check those out. And then, of course, the maturity model, which we talked about at the beginning on community communication competency. And so, Emily shared her checklists, writing for the web and web accessibility checklists. These are great. She's providing a link there from where she got them from. So you can go ahead and click on that one as well, I suspect. And so that is what we have for today. Our next Ask and Praxis is going to be on January 25th. We're going to do something a little different, something we haven't done really before, is a business use case. We're going to talk about managing your organization's quick links in your intranet. And so the idea behind that is going to be how you might go about in a maturity model type of way, managing org-wide quick links. And so we hope that you can join us for that on the 25th. Also, the conference season is going to be starting this spring, and so we now know about a lot of the conferences we're going to be a part of. We've got the European Collaboration Summit, where 4 of us are headed out to Dusseldorf. The Thrive Conference, I believe Mark is going to be at Thrive. 365 EduCon in DC. Again, all four of us are going to be there, and not on this list, but newly found out, is the Microsoft 365 conference. That's in Vegas at the beginning of May, and I will be there. Also, feel free to listen to me on Andrew Connell on Cloud Dev Clarity podcast. We're going to be starting up. We've got some new episodes in the pipeline for 2023, and we'll be diving into those soon. So please join us for that. And so I thank you for joining us again, and happy to have you all be here with us. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll see you on our next episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask and Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues. Join us again as we release new content every other Wednesday.